Aisha Hayes stood by the window of her small apartment in Atlanta, Georgia, gazing at the gray sky, which seemed to mirror her inner turmoil. Rain hammered against the glass, the drops merging into shapeless streams, much like her life had dissolved into chaos over the last few months. Welcome to Betty's Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. Aisha, you still there? A weak voice called from the next room. The 23-year-old sighed and adjusted a stray strand of her dark hair. She had learned long ago how to hide her true emotions behind a smile, but today, even that familiar mask threatened to crumble. "Yes, Mom, I'm coming," she replied, trying to sound cheerful. Her mother's room smelled of medicine and stale air. Lena Hayes lay in bed, her once full face now drawn, her eyes dull with pain and constant exhaustion. The illness had been consuming her for almost a year, and the family had no money for proper treatment. "I brought you some tea." Aisha placed the cup on the bedside table and sat on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Don't ask." Her mother tried to smile, but it was closer to a grimace. "Where's your father?" "Dad? He went to talk to those people." Lena closed her eyes, and a tear rolled down her cheek. "God, how did it come to this? I told Marcus not to take money from them. I told him." Aisha squeezed her mother's hand. She remembered that day 3 months ago when her father came home with a wad of bills, money for her mother's surgery, which they couldn't afford. It had seemed like salvation then, but the loan sharks were not the type to forgive debt. The apartment door burst open with a crash, making both women jump. Marcus Hayes stumbled into the room, and Aisha knew immediately that the conversation had not gone well. Her father's face was ashen, his hands shaking. "Dad, what did they say?" The man sank onto a chair and buried his face in his hands. Silence fell for a few moments, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. "We have 1 week," he finally said, his voice raw. 1 week to pay back the debt. Otherwise— "Otherwise what?" Aisha whispered, though her heart already told her the news would be terrible. "They'll take the apartment, and that's not even the worst of it." "What else?" "They said there's an option." Marcus lifted his eyes to his daughter, eyes full of pain and shame. "Their boss is a wealthy man. He saw you once when he came here, and he's willing to forgive the entire debt if you agree to marry him." Aisha felt the ground drop out from under her. She heard the words, but her brain refused to process them. "Are you serious?" she choked out. "Dad, tell me this is some sick joke. I would never—" Marcus's voice cracked. "Aisha, I would never ask this of you. But they said if we don't pay, they won't just take the apartment. They promised your mother wouldn't live to see the end of the month." Lena gasped, and Aisha felt herself turn to stone. Fragments of thoughts flashed through her mind, each one more terrifying than the last. "Who is he?" she asked, surprised by her own calm. "His name is Elias Thorne. He's nearly 60. They say he barely walks after an illness, but he's incredibly rich, influential." Her father spoke without lifting his eyes. "We don't have a choice, sweetie." The following days passed in a fog. Aisha mechanically went about her duties, caring for her mother, cooking, cleaning, but inside, a storm of conflicting emotions raged: anger at her father's foolishness, pity for her mother, fear of the unknown future, and worst of all, a sense of guilt that deep down she blamed her parents for her situation. On the 3rd day, a man arrived from Elias Thorne. He was tall, well-built, about 40, and wore an expensive suit. He looked so out of place in their dreary apartment that Aisha almost laughed. Almost. "My name is Darius Powell," he introduced himself, handing her a business card. "I'm Mr. Thorne's assistant. He asked me to give you this." Aisha took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph of a mansion that looked like a palace and a short note. "This will be your home. I promise you will want for nothing." "And Mr. Thorne is a man of his word," Darius continued, watching her reaction. "He understands that the situation is unusual, but he's prepared to provide for not just you, but your parents too. Your mother will get the best doctors, treatment abroad if necessary." "And what does he get in return?" Aisha's voice was colder than she expected. "I need to know the truth. What does he really want from me?" Darius Powell hesitated for a moment, choosing his words. "Elias Thorne is nearly 60. He is gravely ill. After a stroke, the left side of his body is barely functional. He walks with great difficulty, leaning on a cane and a nurse's help. The doctors give him a year, maybe 2, at most. He has no heirs, no family. He is alone." The man paused. "He wants to spend the rest of his life not in solitude. He needs company, a wife who will be by his side." "So, I'm supposed to be a nurse?" Bitterness broke through Aisha's voice. "A wife," Darius corrected. "A lawful wife. After his death, you will inherit his entire estate. It is a substantial fortune, believe me. Your family will be set for life." Aisha looked at her mother, who was lying in the next room, having heard every word of the conversation. Their eyes met, and in Lena's eyes, Aisha saw a plea and a readiness to give up everything just so her daughter wouldn't sacrifice herself. "I have conditions," Aisha said, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. "My mother's treatment begins immediately. My father's debt is completely annulled today, and I want to meet him before the wedding, Mr. Thorne." "He prefers not to show himself before the wedding," Darius began, but Aisha cut him off. "Those are my conditions. Either I see him beforehand, or there's no deal." The assistant pulled out his phone and stepped toward the window, talking quietly to someone. Aisha heard fragments of phrases. "She insists." "I understand. Okay, I'll tell her." Finally, he returned. "Mr. Thorne agrees. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a car will pick you up and take you to the estate." He handed her another envelope, this one thick. "This is an advance for your mother's treatment. You'll receive the rest after the marriage registration." When Darius left, Aisha opened the envelope. Inside was more money than she had ever seen in her life. Her father, who peered over her shoulder, turned pale. "God, Aisha, maybe we shouldn't? We'll figure something out." "No, Dad," the girl said firmly. "We won't figure something out. We've run out of options. Tomorrow I'll go and look at this man, and then I'll decide." Aisha couldn't sleep that night. She lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly life could change. Just a month ago, she was an ordinary girl with ordinary dreams, finding a good job, meeting a nice person, starting a family. Now, she was preparing to sell herself to save her parents. A black sedan arrived exactly at 3 o'clock. Aisha put on her best dress, a simple dark burgundy one she had saved for special occasions. The irony of the situation did not escape her. She was dressing up to meet the man who had essentially bought her. Her mother cried as she saw her off, while her father stood apart, unable to meet her eyes. Aisha hugged Lena and whispered, "It's going to be okay, Mom. I promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The drive to the estate took about an hour. The car drove outside the city limits, winding along narrow roads between fields and groves until it turned into tall gates with gilded flourishes. Beyond the gates, the grounds opened up, more like a park than a yard, with perfectly manicured lawns, fountains, and avenues of old trees. And in the center of all this splendor stood the mansion, a 3-story building with columns and balconies that took her breath away. Darius Powell met her at the entrance. "Welcome," he said with a strained smile. "Mr. Thorne is waiting for you in the library. Please, follow me." Inside, the mansion was even more impressive. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, paintings in gilded frames on the walls. Aisha felt as though she had stepped into a museum. Their footsteps echoed in the spacious corridors. The library was on the 2nd floor. Darius opened the massive oak door and stepped aside, letting Aisha enter first. The room was huge, with walls lined floor to ceiling with books. Near the window, seated in a chair with his back to the door, sat a man. Aisha could only see his silhouette, broad shoulders, and gray hair. "Mr. Thorne, your guest," the assistant announced and left, closing the door behind him. A heavy, oppressive silence fell. The man did not turn, and Aisha didn't know what to do, approach or wait. Finally, she took a few steps forward. "Hello." Her voice was quieter than she intended. "Come closer," a deep voice commanded. "I want to see you." Aisha slowly walked around the chair and stopped. Before her sat a man whose face was concealed by a strange half-mask that covered the upper part of his face and one eye. Only his chin, covered in gray stubble, and his thin lips were visible. His left arm lay lifelessly on the armrest, while his right hand rested on the pommel of a cane. "Don't be afraid," he smirked, noticing her reaction. "The stroke spared neither body nor face. The left side is paralyzed, the face is distorted. An unpleasant sight, I agree. That's why I wear this mask." Aisha swallowed. His voice was strong, inconsistent with the image of a frail patient. "Sit." He nodded toward a chair opposite him. "I imagine you have questions." "Why me?" Aisha blurted out, sitting down. "You have so much money. You could hire anyone by any company. Why force me to marry you?" Elias Thorne was silent for a few seconds, as if considering his answer. "Because you won't come to me out of greed," he finally said. "You aren't here because you want my money for yourself. You are here for your family. That speaks volumes about your character." He paused. "My whole life, I've been surrounded by people who wanted something from me: money, connections, influence. Not a single person who was with me just to be with me. And you think I will be with you just to be with you?" Aisha couldn't hold back. "You just said yourself that I'm here for my family." "Yes, but at least you are honest about your motives," he replied. "And I know you won't betray me. Your loyalty to your family is a guarantee that you will fulfill your part of the bargain." "What part exactly?" Aisha asked. "What do you want from me?" Elias Thorne struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. He was indeed barely able to stand. His left leg dragged across the floor. "Just be near me," he said tiredly. "Dine with me, talk to me, read me books. Create the illusion that I have a family, that I am not dying alone." He turned toward the window. "That's all." Aisha looked at the stooped figure by the window and felt a strange mix of pity and revulsion. Pity because he was a dying, lonely man. Revulsion because he used his wealth to buy company without asking what she wanted. "And if I refuse?" she asked softly. "If I stand up right now and leave?" Elias Thorne turned, and his single visible eye flashed with something like surprise. "Then the money I gave for your mother's treatment will have to be returned, and your father's debt will remain. I won't hold you by force. The choice is always yours, Aisha." She stood up and approached the window, standing beside him. From here, there was a beautiful view of the garden, bathed in the pre-sunset light. Somewhere beyond those high walls was her old life, the small apartment, the sick mother, the guilt-ridden father, poverty and hopelessness. "When is the wedding?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the window. "In 1 week. A quiet ceremony, only the bare necessities. No celebrations, unless you object." "I don't object." Aisha turned to him. "I have one more condition." "I'm listening." "I want to continue visiting my parents regularly, and I want them to be able to visit here when Mom feels better." Elias Thorne nodded. "Of course. This is your home now. You can invite anyone you wish." He took a few steps toward the door. Each step was a visible effort. "Darius will show you the rooms. You can choose anyone you like except mine. Your belongings will be brought tomorrow." "Wait," Aisha stopped him. "I haven't given a final yes yet." The man turned, and his lips curved into a semblance of a smile. "But you've already made your decision. I can see it." He opened the door. "Welcome to the golden cage, Aisha." When the door closed behind him, The girl sank back into the chair and covered her face with her hands. There were no tears. She had seemingly cried them all out in the last few days. Only emptiness and exhaustion remained. Darius Powell appeared about 10 minutes later and led her through the mansion. There were so many rooms that Aisha lost count. Living rooms, dining rooms, billiard rooms, a gym, a winter garden. The bedrooms were on the 3rd floor, an entire suite of rooms with high ceilings and huge windows. "This part of the estate is entirely at your disposal," the assistant explained. "Mr. Thorne occupies rooms on the 1st floor. It's difficult for him to use the stairs. You may choose any bedroom." Aisha stopped by a room in the corner of the building. The windows offered views of the garden on one side and the woods on the other. The room was bright and spacious, the furniture substantial but not ostentatious. "This one," she said. "An excellent choice," Darius approved. "Someone used to live here." He stumbled. "Never mind. Tomorrow, I'll arrange for your personal belongings to be brought here. And now, allow me to escort you to dinner. Mr. Thorne expects you in the small dining room at 7 o'clock. Left alone, Aisha walked to the window and leaned her forehead against the cool glass. Down below, a gardener was clipping hedges. A peaceful, ordinary scene. But inside Aisha, everything was churning. She remembered Elias Thorne's words about the golden cage, how accurately he had put it. Everything was here. Wealth, comfort, safety. Everything but freedom. At 7 o'clock that evening, she went down to the small dining room. The small room was the size of their entire apartment. A long table was set for 2 people at opposite ends. Elias Thorne was already seated in his place. The mask still concealed his face. "Please sit." He gestured to the seat opposite. Dinner passed in an oppressive silence. Aisha barely touched her food, though the dishes were exquisite. Elias Thorne ate slowly, awkwardly handling his fork with his right hand. "Tell me about yourself," he finally said. "What did you do? What do you like?" "I worked at the public library," Aisha replied shortly. "I love to read." "What kind of books?" "Classics. Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. I read modern fiction too." "We have a large library here," he noted. "You can take any book. I love to read too, but my sight is failing now. It would be pleasant if you would read to me aloud sometimes." Aisha nodded, without meeting his eyes. After dinner, Aisha returned to her room and stood by the window for a long time, looking into the darkness. The stars in the sky seemed distant and cold, like her new life. She tried to imagine living here permanently, that this was her home, but the thought wouldn't settle in her mind. In the morning, she was awakened by a knock on the door. A woman in her 50s, wearing a strict gray dress, stood on the threshold. "Good morning," she said with a slight accent. "My name is Esther. I am the housekeeper. Mr. Thorne asked me to tell you that breakfast is served at 8. Your belongings have been delivered. I arranged for them to be placed in the dressing room." Aisha walked into the dressing room and stopped at the threshold. Her modest suitcase of clothes was lost among the new dresses, suits, and shoes. Everything was expensive, high quality, clearly chosen to fit her size. "Where did this come from?" she asked, bewildered. "Mr. Thorne arranged it," Esther shrugged. "He said a wife should look the part. If anything doesn't fit, tell me and we'll exchange it." Aisha ran her hand over a silk dress. She could only have dreamed of such things before. Now she had an entire wardrobe, but it brought her no joy. Every dress was a reminder of the price she had paid. The following days blurred into a monotonous routine. Breakfasts and dinners with Elias Thorne, conducted with polite but strained conversation. Long hours in the library where she read aloud to him. Solitary walks in the garden. Elias Thorne did not insist on her constant presence. He gave her freedom. But that freedom was illusory. She was still in a cage, even if it was gilded. She was surprised that Elias never once attempted to get physically close to her. He maintained his distance, always polite and proper. Sometimes she caught his gaze, the single eye visible from behind the mask, looking with a kind of melancholy, but he would immediately look away. On the 4th evening, while Aisha was reading him a story by Chekhov, He suddenly interrupted her. "Are you unhappy here?" It wasn't a question. Aisha closed the book and looked at him. "What did you expect? That I'd be ecstatic?" "No," he sighed heavily. "But I hoped that in time you would at least grow accustomed to life in captivity." "To selling myself?" Bitterness broke through her voice. "You saved your family," he countered. "It's not a sale. It's a sacrifice." "There's little difference." Aisha stood up. "May I go? I'm tired." Elias Thorne nodded, and she headed for the door. But his voice stopped her. "Aisha, I know what you think of me, and maybe you're right, but believe me, if I had had any other way—" He fell silent. "Good night." She left without replying. In the corridor, she ran into Darius Powell. "How is he feeling?" the assistant asked. "Tired?" Aisha answered curtly, trying to pass him, but he detained her with a question. "Do you know why he wears the mask constantly?" "He said his face is paralyzed after the stroke." Darius looked at her strangely. "Yes, of course. That's the only reason." He nodded and left, leaving Aisha perplexed. What did he mean? The wedding took place exactly 1 week later, as Elias Thorne had promised. A small ceremony at the county clerk's office without guests or celebration. Only the two of them, Darius Powell as a witness, and some elderly woman Aisha hadn't seen before. Elias Thorne arrived in a formal black suit, leaning on his cane. The mask still concealed half of his face. Aisha wore a simple white dress, one of the new additions to her wardrobe. She couldn't bring herself to look in the mirror before leaving. The ceremony was short and joyless. When the clerk pronounced them husband and wife, Elias Thorne did not attempt to kiss the bride. He simply took her hand. His palm was surprisingly warm and dry. He whispered, "Thank you." Aisha didn't answer. A lump in her throat kept her from uttering a word. After the registration, Darius Powell drove them back to the estate. On the way, Aisha stared out the window, not seeing the passing scenery. She was now officially Mrs. Thorne. She suddenly realized she didn't even know her husband's last name. "What is your last name?" she asked, breaking the silence. Elias Thorne smirked. "Thorne. And now it's yours. It sounds ironic, doesn't it? Thorns are hardly a symbol of loyalty and love, but for us—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Aisha understood. They had a contract, a deal, but certainly not love. That evening, Esther appeared in Aisha's room with a tray. "Mr. Thorne asked me to tell you that dinner will be in his quarters," the housekeeper said, placing the tray on the small table. "He expects you at 9 o'clock this evening." "In his quarters?" Aisha repeated, her heart beating faster. "But we always dine in the dining room." "Today is a special day." Esther avoided her gaze. The wedding, after all. When the housekeeper left, Aisha sank onto the bed. Her hands were shaking. She knew this moment had to come, but she was still unprepared. All day she had convinced herself that Elias was too sick, too frail for conjugal relations. But what if she was wrong? At 9 o'clock, gathering all her resolve, she went down to the first floor. Elias Thorne's rooms were in the east wing of the mansion, where she had never been before. The corridor was dimly lit. Shadows danced on the walls. She knocked on the massive door. "Come in," his voice called out. The room was unexpectedly modest. A large bed with a dark coverlet, a few armchairs, bookshelves, a lit fireplace. A small table was set for dinner for two, with candles, wine, and exquisite dishes. Elias Thorne stood by the fireplace, still wearing his mask. He turned as he heard her steps. "Don't be afraid," he said, as if reading her mind. "I won't. I just asked you to have dinner. Traditionally, a couple spends their first night together, but I understand that would be too much for you." Aisha felt a wave of relief, immediately replaced by shame. She sat down at the table, avoiding his eyes. "I wanted to talk about the rules of our life together," Elias Thorne continued, taking a seat opposite her. "You are free to do whatever you want. Meet friends, travel wherever you wish. The money is at your disposal. I have no intention of controlling you." Then why all this? Aisha blurted out. If you don't need a real wife, why the marriage? Elias Thorne poured wine into 2 glasses. I need company, he said simply. Someone who will be here, in this house. Someone I can talk to in the evening. Someone who will be near when the end comes. He fell silent, gazing into the fireplace. You can't imagine how terrifying it is to die alone. There was such sorrow in his voice that Aisha felt an unexpected pang of pity. Tell me about yourself, she requested. Who are you? Where did the money come from? Why are you alone? Elias Thorne was silent for a long time, then sipped his wine. A long and sad story. I'm sure you don't want to hear it. I do, Aisha insisted. If we are husband and wife now, I should at least know who I'm living under the same roof with. Elias Thorne leaned back in his chair. His fingers clenched the glass. The fire in the fireplace cast strange shadows on his figure, making him look like a ghost from the past. I was born into a poor family, he began. My father drank. My mother worked 2 jobs to feed my brother and me. I understood from childhood that if I wanted to achieve anything, I'd have to fight my way up. I studied hard, went to college, worked wherever I could. He paused. And then came the big boom. Chaos, opportunities, risks. I took a risk, took out a loan, started a small business. I got lucky. The business took off. Then another, and another. After 10 years, I was wealthy. After 20, very wealthy. And were you alone all that time? Aisha asked. No. Bitterness entered his voice. I was married. Celeste. She was beautiful, smart. I thought I loved her. We married when I was 35. We had a daughter. Aisha flinched. A daughter. So he had a family. What happened? She asked softly. I was too busy with business. Elias Thorne looked into the fire without blinking. Constant travel, meetings, deals. I thought I was providing for them, giving them the very best. But in reality, I was just absent. Celeste felt lonely. And then she met another man, my former business partner. His voice grew harsh. They had an affair behind my back for an entire year. When I found out, I caused a scene. Celeste took our daughter and left with him. And your daughter? How old was she? 12. Her name was Zoe. He clenched his fist. I tried to fight for her, but my wife turned the child against me. She said I abandoned them, that money was more important to me. Zoe stopped talking to me. And then there was the accident. Aisha froze, sensing something terrible. Celeste and her new husband were driving. Zoe was with them. A drunk driver crossed into oncoming traffic. Elias Thorne fell silent, and Aisha saw his hand tremble. All 3 died instantly. Zoe was 16. I am so sorry, Aisha whispered, and for the first time her sympathy was genuine. After that, I shut everyone out, Elias Thorne continued. I immersed myself in work even more. I built this estate. I thought I would create some kind of family nest here, where I could bring my grandchildren someday. Foolish, right? He smiled bitterly. And then the stroke happened. The doctor said, stress, overwork, age. I found myself chained to this trap of a body, half of which doesn't work. Aisha looked at him, and something shifted inside her. This wasn't just a rich old man who bought a young wife. This was a broken man who had lost everything that mattered. That's why you wear the mask, she said. Not just because of the paralysis. Elias Thorne nodded. I don't want to see pity in people's eyes. It's enough that I see it in the mirror every morning. They sat in silence, broken only by the crackling of wood in the fireplace. Aisha pondered what she had heard. Her own pain hadn't vanished, but now she understood that Elias was suffering too. The room I chose, she said suddenly. Darius Powell started to say someone lived there before. Was it Zoe? Elias Thorne flinched, as if struck. Yes, he managed. I furnished it, prepared it for my daughter's arrival, hoping she would visit me someday, but she never came. After her death, I ordered the room closed. No one entered it for almost 7 years. Should I choose another one? Aisha offered. No, he answered sharply. On the contrary, let there be life in that room again. Let it not stand as an empty mausoleum. He stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. It's late. You should go rest. Aisha stood but lingered at the door. Mr. Thorne, thank you for telling me. I truly am sorry. It's all in the past. He waved her off, but she could see how tense his shoulders were. Good night, Aisha. Aisha went up to her room and couldn't sleep for a long time. Elias Thorne's story haunted her. She imagined the small Zoe, who lived within these walls only in her father's dreams, the girl who never knew she had a home waiting for her return. In the morning, Aisha woke up to the sound of rain. Gray drops drummed against the glass, turning the garden outside into a blurry watercolor. She got dressed and went down to breakfast, but Elias was not at the table. He's not feeling well, Esther explained, pouring her coffee. The doctor is with him now. He said he should feel better by lunchtime. Is it serious? Aisha asked, surprised by her own concern. An exacerbation. It happens after stress or overexertion. The housekeeper shook her head. Yesterday was hard for him. The wedding, talking about the past. Aisha felt a pang of guilt. Can I visit him? Esther raised her eyebrows in surprise. Of course. You're his wife now. Just wait until the doctor finishes his examination. Aisha spent the morning in the library trying to read, but her thoughts constantly returned to Elias. Around noon, Darius Powell appeared. Mr. Thorne asks you to come in, if you don't mind. She followed him to her husband's quarters. Elias Thorne was lying in bed, pale, but he still hadn't removed the mask. Seeing Aisha, he tried to raise himself, but she gestured for him to stay. Lie still. How do you feel? I'll live. He smiled faintly. I'm sorry I ruined your first day of marriage. Nonsense. Aisha pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. You need to rest. Maybe I should read something to you? Elias looked at her in surprise. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. She picked up the book on the bedside table, a collection of Chekhov's short stories, and began to read. Her voice was calm and melodious, filling the room. Elias Thorne closed his eyes, and for the first time in days, the expression on his face became peaceful. She read for about an hour. When she finished the story, she saw that Elias was asleep. She quietly stood up, preparing to leave, but his voice stopped her. Don't go, please. Aisha turned around. He hadn't opened his eyes, but his hand was slightly outstretched toward her. Just sit here. I feel better when you're near. She returned to the chair and they sat in silence. The rain outside grew heavier, turning into a downpour. The fire crackled in the fireplace. And in that quiet, Aisha suddenly realized that she didn't feel as burdened as before. Something had changed after yesterday's conversation. That evening, when Elias was better, they dined together in his room. He ate little but was in a better mood. Your mother, he said between courses. Darius arranged it with the clinic. She'll be brought in for a full diagnostic exam the day after tomorrow. The best specialists. Thank you. Aisha felt tears welling up. You can't imagine how much this means to me. I can imagine. He took a glass of water. Family is the most precious thing. I realized that too late. But you still have time. You have your whole life ahead of you. You do too, Aisha countered. Doctors can be wrong. Elias Thorne smiled sadly. My dear, I've already made peace with it. But I'm grateful to fate for sending you to me, if only at the end. They stayed up late together, talking about everything and nothing. Elias shared stories from his youth, and Aisha spoke about the library where she worked and the books she loved, and with every passing minute, the wall between them grew thinner. When Aisha returned to her room, it was past midnight. She lay in bed and closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Elias Thorne's voice echoed in her head. I feel better when you're near. Such a simple phrase, yet so full of loneliness. Then she heard a scream. Aisha sprang out of bed and without hesitation rushed down the stairs. The cry came from Elias's quarters, desperate, full of pain. She flung the door open and froze on the threshold. Elias Thorne was lying on the floor near the bed, curled up in agony. The mask had slipped off to the side, revealing part of his face. His overturned cane lay beside him. "Mr. Thorne," Aisha rushed to him. "What happened?" "I fell," he forced out through clenched teeth. "I tried to get to the bathroom. My leg gave out." "Don't move." She grabbed the phone she saw on the nightstand and dialed the number saved under the name Darius. The assistant answered after the third ring, his voice groggy. "Come immediately and call a doctor. Mr. Thorne has fallen." While they waited, Aisha cautiously helped him sit up, leaning his back against the bed. Elias Thorne was breathing heavily, his face contorted with pain. The mask was now dangling from its cord, fully exposing his face. Aisha saw him completely for the first time. The left side was indeed paralyzed, the eyelid drooping, the corner of his mouth frozen in an unnatural position. But that wasn't what made her hold her breath. Even through the traces of illness, through the gray hair and wrinkles, she saw features that seemed vaguely familiar, something in the shape of his cheekbones, the line of his jaw, the set of his eyes. "Don't look!" Elias Thorne tried to turn his head, but Aisha gently stopped him. "It's okay. You know I'm not squeamish." She took a towel from the armchair and carefully wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Where does it hurt the most?" "My leg. I think I twisted my ankle." 10 minutes later, Darius Powell rushed in, followed by the doctor, an elderly man with gray temples and tired eyes. While the doctor examined Elias, Aisha stood aside but had no intention of leaving. "A sprain," the doctor confirmed. "A severe bruise. We need to immobilize it. Several days of bed rest are essential." "I'll manage," Elias began, but the doctor interrupted him. "You need help, constant help. You cannot be alone, Mr. Thorne. In your condition, any fall could end up much worse." "He has me," Aisha said, surprising even herself. "I'll take care of him." The three of them, Elias, the doctor, and Darius, stared at her. "Aisha, you don't have to," Elias began, but she raised her hand. "I am your wife, officially, and wives care for their husbands when they are sick, so don't argue." The doctor nodded approvingly and began giving instructions. Aisha listened intently, memorizing every word. When the doctor and Darius Powell finally left, she helped Elias move onto the bed. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly as she covered him with a blanket. "We both know this isn't a real marriage." Aisha sat on the edge of the bed. "Maybe it's not real in the usual sense, but you helped my family. You gave my mother a chance to live, and I can't just stand by when you're in pain." Elias Thorne looked at her for a long time, and something like tears shone in his visible eye. "You are amazing," he whispered. "Zoe would have been just as kind, just as compassionate." "Tell me about her," Aisha requested. "What was she like?" And Elias Thorne told her about the little girl with pigtails who adored reading fairy tales, about how she dreamed of becoming a doctor, about her laughter that sounded like bells. He spoke, and tears streamed down his face, no longer hidden by the mask. Aisha held his hand and listened in silence, and later, when he fell asleep, exhausted by pain and memories, she remained sitting near him, not in her luxurious room on the third floor, but here, in the armchair by his bed. In the morning, she woke up to someone covering her with a throw blanket. Opening her eyes, she saw Esther. "You sat up all night," the housekeeper shook her head. "Go wash up and change your clothes. I'll sit with him." But as soon as Aisha stood up, Elias opened his eyes. "You're here?" A sound of relief was in his voice. "I'm here," she nodded, "and I'm not going anywhere." The following days were hard. Aisha hardly left Elias's side, helping him with everything. She read him books, brought him meals, helped him move, and with each day, their bond grew stronger. A week passed since Elias's fall. Aisha had grown used to the new routine. She spent most of her time with him, and it no longer felt like an obligation. Elias turned out to be an unexpectedly interesting conversationalist. He had traveled widely, knew several languages, and understood art and literature. Behind his gruff millionaire mask was a highly educated and sensitive man. That day, Aisha was scheduled to visit her mother at the clinic. The examination showed that surgery was possible, and it was scheduled for the following week. Her mother looked better. Hope was working wonders. "How is he?" Lena Hayes asked when they were alone. "Your husband?" Aisha pondered the question. "He's not who I imagined. He's a good man, Mom, just very lonely and unhappy." "Do you love him?" her mother asked gently. "No," Aisha answered too quickly. I don't know. It's not love in the usual sense, but I'm not indifferent to what happens to him, and it's not hard for me to be near him anymore." Lena took her hand. "You know, Aisha, love comes in different ways. It doesn't always strike like lightning, like in the romances. Sometimes it grows slowly, from care, from understanding. Maybe what you feel is the beginning of something real." Returning to the estate that evening, Aisha found an unusual stir. An unfamiliar car was parked at the entrance, and in the hall she bumped into a tall man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit. "And you must be Elias's new wife," he said with an unpleasant smirk. "Well, I have to hand it to my brother. He always had excellent taste." Aisha stopped dead in her tracks. "Brother, excuse me, I didn't introduce myself." The man extended his hand. "Silas Thorne, Elias's younger brother, though I prefer to say the less fortunate one." Ill-concealed envy was in his voice. Aisha shook the extended hand coldly. "Mr. Thorne didn't mention you were coming." "He didn't know," Silas Thorne smirked. "I decided to pay my brother a visit. Found out about his hasty marriage and thought I had to congratulate him. Where is he, by the way? In his quarters? But he shouldn't be disturbed. He recently fell." I know, Silas interrupted. "Darius told me everything. His body is completely failing now, huh?" He walked past her toward the stairs. "Don't worry, I won't tire him out." Aisha wanted to stop him, but at that moment, Elias's voice called from his room. "Let him in, Aisha. He won't rest otherwise." Silas Thorne entered his brother's room, and Aisha remained in the corridor, but the door didn't close completely. She involuntarily overheard the conversation. Well, well, brother," Silas's voice sounded mocking. "Completely gone downhill. Or is this another performance?" "What do you want, Silas?" Elias's voice was weary. "Can a relative just visit? I found out you married a girl young enough to be your granddaughter. Bought yourself a nurse." "Watch your language." "And what's wrong with that?" Silas laughed. "We both know the truth. You paid for her, like a possession. Just as you bought everything in your life, business, connections, even your first wife." "Celeste didn't marry me for money," Elias countered, but uncertainty was in his voice. "Keep telling yourself that, but we both know she didn't love you. And you know what's funny? Neither did Zoe. Your daughter hated you, Elias. She told me so." Silence fell. Aisha pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. You saw Zoe?" Elias's voice trembled. "Of course. Celeste called me after your breakup. We met. She wanted advice on how to handle you, and Zoe was with her. Sweet girl, too bad she died." There was not a shred of regret in Silas's voice. "But you know what she asked me? Why her father was so cold. Why you were never there for her. She cried, Elias. Your daughter cried because of you." "Get out," Elias whispered. "Please, get out." "One more question, brother. Have you changed your will in favor of your young wife yet?" He paused. "Or does she still not know that the inheritance promised to her still needs to be formally arranged? I wonder what would happen if you didn't manage to do it. The old will in my name is still valid." Aisha froze. The will. It hadn't been changed yet. "I plan to rewrite it this week," Elias said. "I've already arranged it with the notary." "You plan to," Silas mimicked, "but you haven't rewritten it yet. And given your health, you might not make it. Think about that, and how your sweet little wife might be wasting her time on a dying old man." He walked out of the room and ran straight into Aisha in the corridor. He smirked. Eavesdropping? It's fine. Now you know the truth. My advice, hurry him up with the will, or you might be left with nothing. Aisha watched Silas walk away, feeling everything churn inside her. His brother's words echoed in her head. Hurry him up with the will. You might be left with nothing. She slowly entered Elias's quarters. He was sitting on the bed with his back to the door. His shoulders were slumped. The mask lay on the nightstand. He had stopped wearing it around Aisha after the night he fell. Hearing her steps, he didn't turn around. You heard everything? It wasn't a question. Yes. Aisha walked closer. Is it true? The will is still in his name? Elias Thorne sighed heavily and finally turned to her. His face, distorted by the paralysis, looked especially sad in the dim light of the evening lamps. Yes, I drew it up years ago, when Silas and I were still on normal terms. After Zoe's death, I just didn't see the point in changing it. There was no one left to leave the fortune to. He looked at her. When you agreed to marry me, I immediately told Darius to contact the notary. I wanted to transfer everything to you. Why didn't you do it? The notary was out of town. He won't return until the day after tomorrow. I was going to tell you, but... He stopped. I was afraid you'd think I was trying to buy your affection, that money was all I could offer. Aisha sat down on the stool next to the bed. Her thoughts were racing. Darius had promised her the inheritance even before the wedding. So Elias really had planned to change the will from the very beginning. But what if he didn't make it? What if something happened before the meeting with the notary? What are you thinking about? Elias Thorne asked softly. I'm thinking Silas is right, she admitted. I truly agreed to this marriage because of the money. Not for myself, but still because of money. That makes me no better than the people you call the buyers in your life. No, Elias Thorne countered sharply. You're not like that. Silas said those things intentionally to cause trouble between us. He is envious and greedy. He always has been. I helped him, gave him money for his business, bailed him out of debt. But he always wanted more. He wanted what I had, but he didn't want to work for it. He said you bought everything in life, even Celeste. Elias Thorne closed his eyes, and a grimace of pain crossed his face. Maybe he's right. Maybe I really did think money solved everything. I showered Celeste with gifts, bought her a huge house, an expensive car. I thought that was love, giving a person everything they wanted, but I forgot the most important thing, to give her myself, my time, my attention. He opened his eyes and looked at Aisha. With you, I don't want to repeat that mistake. I don't want only money between us. But we already had a deal. Aisha felt her voice tremble. You bought me. You paid for my company. Isn't that the same thing? At first, yes, Elias admitted. But now, Aisha, tell me honestly. When you sat by my bed the night I fell, when you read me books, cared for me this past week, did you do it only because I paid for your mother's treatment? Or was there something else? Aisha remained silent. She didn't know what to answer because she didn't fully understand her own feelings. When she cared for Elias, it wasn't a burden. Moreover, she worried about him. She was concerned when he was unwell. But was it love? Or simply pity for a lonely, sick man? I don't know, she finally admitted. I truly care about what happens to you, but I can't say I love you. That would be a lie. I'm not asking for love. Elias Thorne reached out and gently covered her hand with his. I'm just asking you not to leave, to stay with me until the end. And not because of the money, not because of the will, but simply because I feel better when you're near. Aisha looked at their joined hands. His palm was warm. His fingers gently squeezed her hand. And in that touch, there was nothing demanding, nothing insistent, only a request and hope. All right, she whispered. I'll stay. They sat like that for several minutes in silence. Then Aisha cautiously withdrew her hand. You need to rest, and I need to think. She left the room and went up to her own. All night, she couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, replaying the conversation with Elias and Silas's words in her head. By morning, she had made a decision. At breakfast, she told Elias, "I want you not to change the will." He dropped the fork he was about to use to eat his omelet. "What?" "Don't change the will in my name," Aisha repeated firmly. "I don't want money hanging between us. I don't want to think about the inheritance every time you feel unwell. And I don't want you to think I'm only here for that reason." "Aisha, this is insane." Elias Thorne shook his head. "You married me on the condition that you would receive security." "I can't." "You can," Aisha interrupted him. "You owe me nothing. Mom is already receiving treatment. Dad's debt is closed. That's enough. The rest is only if I truly deserve it. Not as a contract wife, but as—" She paused, searching for words. "As someone you genuinely held dear." Elias Thorne looked at her for a long time, and tears glistened in his visible eye. "You are amazing," he whispered. "Absolutely amazing. I just don't want to live with the thought that I'm waiting for you to die for money," Aisha confessed. "What you've already done for my family is enough. And if you still want to leave me something, only do it when you are certain I deserve it, not before." Darius Powell appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Thorne, the notary became available sooner. He can come this evening if that's convenient for you." Elias and Aisha exchanged glances. He raised an eyebrow questioningly, and she nodded. The decision was made. "Tell him I've changed my mind," Elias Thorne told the assistant. "I won't be changing the will." Darius Powell looked at both of them in surprise, but remained silent, just nodding and leaving. The following days passed in a strange tension. Aisha felt that her decision to refuse the will had changed something between her and Elias. He looked at her differently, with a kind of reverence and tenderness that hadn't been there before, and she herself found herself missing him more often when he wasn't around. Her mother's surgery was successful. Aisha spent the entire day at the clinic holding her father's hand, who was beside himself with worry. When the surgeon came out of the operating room and reported that everything went well, Marcus Hayes burst into tears, and Aisha felt the weight that had been crushing her for months finally lift from her shoulders. That evening, she returned to the estate, tired but happy. Elias Thorne was waiting for her in the library, and when she shared the news, he truly smiled, despite his distorted face. "I'm happy, Aisha. Very happy for you and your family. It's all thanks to you." She sat down next to his armchair. "If it weren't for you, Mom wouldn't have lived to see the surgery." "Then I did at least one thing right in this life." He took her hand in his. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said, about the will, and I want you to know, I'll still take care of you. Maybe not through the will, but there are other ways. A trust fund, for example. Silas won't be able to contest that." "Mr. Thorne, please." He squeezed her hand. "Allow me to do this, not because you're my contract wife, but because you've become dear to me, very dear. And I cannot allow you to be left with nothing after my death while Silas swims in money." Aisha looked into his eyes and saw such sincerity that she couldn't refuse. "All right, but only a reasonable amount, not the entire fortune. Deal?" Elias Thorne sighed with relief. They sat in the library late into the evening, talking about books, about life, about dreams. Elias spoke of the places he had been, the countries he wished he could show Aisha if his health allowed. She listened, imagining those journeys, and sadly realized they would never happen. "What are you thinking about?" Elias Thorne asked, noticing her sad gaze. "I'm thinking it's unfair. You know so much. You've seen so much. And now you're confined to this house, this chair." She paused. "You dreamed of showing me the world, but we both know that's impossible." "Not everything is lost." Elias Thorne smiled unexpectedly. "I have an idea, but it's a surprise. You'll find out tomorrow." The next morning, Aisha woke up to a knock on the door. Esther brought a tray with breakfast and smiled mysteriously. "Mr. Thorne asked me to tell you to dress warmly and come down to the main entrance at 10 o'clock. "What's happening?" Aisha asked, intrigued. "You'll see." The housekeeper only smiled enigmatically. Exactly at 10 o'clock, Aisha went downstairs. Elias Thorne was waiting for her at the entrance, dressed in a warm coat and leaning on his cane. Darius Powell stood nearby. "We're going for a ride," Elias announced. "I want to show you a place." They got into the car, a spacious SUV with comfortable seats, and drove off. The journey took about an hour. Aisha watched the scenery pass by the window. Fields, groves, small towns. Elias was silent, but a smile played on his face. Finally, they pulled up to a small lake surrounded by woods. The shore was scattered with colorful autumn leaves. The water was calm and clear, reflecting the sky. Right by the water stood a wooden gazebo with a view of the lake. "This is my favorite spot," Elias said when they got out of the car. Darius helped him reach the gazebo. "I bought this land years ago. I wanted to build a house here, but I never got around to it. And then the stroke happened, and I decided I wouldn't return here. Too far, too difficult with my health." "So, why did we come?" Aisha asked, sitting down next to him on the bench in the gazebo. "Because I realized, if not now, then never." Elias Thorne looked at the lake. "I can't show you Paris or Rome. I can't take you to the mountains or the sea, but I can share what is precious to me, this place, this beauty." Aisha felt a lump in her throat. She looked at the lake, at the trees reflected in the water, at the quiet, peaceful scene around them, and understood that it was truly beautiful, perhaps even more beautiful than foreign sights. "Thank you," she whispered. This is a truly special place." They sat there for more than an hour, simply enjoying the quiet and the peace. Elias Thorne talked about how he found the lake, how he dreamed of building a small home for his family here. Aisha listened and imagined what his life could have been like if things had turned out differently. On the way back, Elias Thorne dozed off in the car, resting his head on Aisha's shoulder. She sat motionless, afraid to wake him, and looked at his face. Even distorted by paralysis, it now seemed familiar to her. Once, she had only seen an old, sick man who bought her. Now she saw a person with a broken heart who was trying to find some warmth before the end, and she suddenly realized that she had fallen in love. Not passionately, not madly, but quietly, deeply, truly. The thought shocked and frightened her at the same time. She had fallen in love with a dying man, a man who had so little time left. That evening, while Elias Thorne was resting after the trip, Esther knocked on Aisha's door. The housekeeper's face was troubled. "We have a problem," she said softly. "I overheard Darius Powell's phone conversation. He was talking to Silas Thorne about Mr. Thorne's health, about him leaving the house today. Silas asked when this end might come, and Darius replied, 'Soon, very soon.'" Aisha went cold. "You think—" "I don't know what to think." Esther shook her head. "But I don't like what I heard. Darius Powell has worked for Mr. Thorne for 20 years, but he's also well acquainted with Silas. And if the will is still in the younger brother's name—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Aisha understood everything. "We have to warn Mr. Thorne." "Warn him of what?" The housekeeper threw up her hands. "We have no proof, just suspicions, and Mr. Thorne trusts Darius as he trusts himself." "Then I'll be more watchful," Aisha said decisively. "I won't leave his side for a moment." For the next few days, she indeed barely left Elias Thorne's side. In the morning they had breakfast together. During the day she read to him, or they simply talked, and in the evening they had dinner. Darius Powell tried to draw her away several times under different pretexts, some documents to sign or to talk about decorating her room. But Aisha always found a reason to stay with Elias. She saw the assistant frown, saw the irritated glances he threw her way, but he said nothing, did not insist. Maybe Esther was mistaken. Maybe the conversation was harmless. But then something happened that dispelled all doubts. It happened a week after the trip to the lake. Aisha came to Elias Thorne with his morning tea, as she did every day. He was sitting in his armchair by the window, holding a document. His face was deathly pale. "What's wrong?" Aisha asked, alarmed. Elias Thorne silently handed her the paper. It was a printout of a bank transfer. A very large sum had been moved from his account to an offshore account 3 days ago, and the signature on the transfer document was his, Elias's. "I didn't do this," he whispered. "Aisha, I did not sign this transfer. I never even saw this document." Aisha looked at the signature. It was indeed very similar to Elias Thorne's handwriting, which she had seen many times. But there was one detail, the last letter of the surname. Elias always drew it with a distinctive flourish. Here, the flourish was missing. "It's a forgery," she said. "Someone faked your signature and stole the money." "Darius," Elias Thorne gasped. "Only he has access to my accounts. Only he could have done this." At that moment, the door burst open and Darius Powell himself appeared on the threshold. In his hand was a handgun. "What a shame you discovered this so quickly, Mr. Thorne," he said coldly. "I was counting on having more time." Aisha instinctively stepped forward, shielding Elias. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it would jump out of her chest. "Darius, what are you doing?" Elias Thorne's voice trembled not from fear, but from the pain of betrayal. 20 years you were by my side." 20 years I was your shadow," the assistant shouted, his face contorted. 20 years I carried out your every whim, smiled, bowed. You didn't even notice me as a person. I was just a function, a tool. And Silas Thorne? He offered me a share. Real money after your death. All I had to do was help it happen a little faster." "You wanted to kill him?" Aisha whispered. "Didn't want to. I want to," Darius corrected coldly. "Today. Right now. An accident. The old man fell down the stairs. No one will prove anything. And tomorrow, Silas Thorne inherits everything and I get my cut." "And me?" Aisha asked, trying to buy time. "What about me? You were a witness. Sadly, you tried to help your husband and fell too. A tragedy." Elias Thorne tried to stand up, but Darius aimed the gun directly at him. "Sit down." At that moment, the door behind Darius Powell flew open, and Esther burst into the room with a heavy candlestick in her hands. The blow landed precisely on the back of his head. Darius grunted and collapsed onto the floor. The gun fell from his hands. "I heard," the housekeeper panted. "I heard and called the police. They're already on their way." Aisha rushed to Elias. He was sitting pale in shock. She hugged him, and he clung to her like a child. "It's over," she whispered. "It's all right. I'm here." The police arrived 10 minutes later. Darius Powell was taken away in handcuffs. It turned out that Esther had already contacted the bank and blocked the transfer. The money remained in Elias's account. And the recordings from the surveillance cameras installed in the mansion showed Darius forging the signature. Silas Thorne was also arrested. The correspondence on Darius's phone was full of evidence of their conspiracy. 3 months passed. Aisha was sitting in the same gazebo by the lake where they had visited with Elias. He sat beside her, but without a cane. The rehabilitation, which began after Darius's arrest, yielded unexpected results. It turned out that some of the symptoms were exacerbated by medication that the assistant had secretly been administering. Without those additives, Elias began to recover. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, taking her hand. "About the strange journey we had to take." Aisha looked at his face. The paralysis hadn't vanished completely, but it was significantly reduced. He no longer wore the mask. "We started as strangers bound by a contract," Elias finished. "And now we're family, a real family, without contracts or conditions." "You know what's funny?" Aisha smiled. "On our wedding night, I thought that when you took off your mask, I would see a monster. But I saw a person, just a person who needed love. And you gave me that love." Elias Thorne leaned in and kissed her. Gently, carefully. the first real kiss in all their months of marriage. In the distance, on the shore of the lake, builders were laying the foundation for the house, the very one Elias had dreamed of. Now it was no longer a dream, but reality, their future. And in Elias Thorne's jacket pocket was a new document, a will that transferred his entire estate to Aisha. Not because she was his contract wife, but because she had saved his life and, more importantly, given him love. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.